The member for Bowman in returning to the MPI.
Great. Deputy Speaker, thank you. Look, terms of trade have peaked. Our commodity boom as far as new starts go has probably flattened, and now we have the great challenge in this country to have a responsive economy that can direct resources to the areas where it's most productive. That's why we're here today for the IMD Competitiveness Survey, which shows that despite all the rhetoric we heard from the previous speaker, who gave us absolutely no figures and no data whatsoever, from all of that data-less, evidence-free zone of political talking points that you could have easily substituted the political party and then read the rest out. When you take all of that away, you're left with a party that's unable to provide any data at all to explain why we've fallen through the floor on competitiveness. Look, Deputy Speaker, we operate as developed economies in effectively a peloton. At the head of the pack, we can do very little about the winds that strike the entire group, such as the GFC. But we can, as governments and as industry within an economy, work to keep ourselves at the front of the pack. And that is what every government should strive to do. It should be its #1 objective, to unshackle its citizenry so they can have spare money in their pockets to do the things they want to do and not be constantly molested by a government that can't keep their hands out of the pockets of everyday citizens. So what do we have? We've got a government that over the last 5 years has done just that, and this IMD competitiveness data shows us and spells it out word by word, criteria by criteria, and nothing from the other side has rebutted that. Now, we now understand the meta-story around the GFC. It's simple. We started with a large Howard surplus and we were able to buy our way through the worst of it. We had strongly regulated banks with 4 of the top 22 in the world, and they were not attracted to the highly sophisticated financial products that the rest of the world got their fingers caught in. And finally, we had a mining boom that just kept pumping out the resources that most of the world needed, and they kept buying, thank you to forward contracts. That got us through. And no matter how much this side of politics keeps telling you it was something to do with the pink bats and the school halls, that had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But now what we have, Deputy Speaker, is a government that has the hide to come into this place and say, you know what, we got you through the worst of the GFC due to our doing, and in the same breath cannot explain why we've suddenly fallen through the floor on competitiveness. And we now rank just above Syria. I mean, Deputy Speaker, there is a reason for that. We will give you these reasons because they are numbers that cannot be refuted, and these numbers have been accumulating for some time. Look, Deputy Speaker, we operate in a competitive sector of the world, a competitive region of the world. We are surrounded by economies like South Korea, that was mentioned by the previous speaker, China, Japan and even Hong Kong. Where are the free trade agreements with those massive economies? No, we're doing a big go slow on FTAs. That's right. We even repudiated the notion of having one with Hong Kong. Okay? They managed to sign up to a few, many of which started under the Howard government, but the moves towards free trade agreements have been extremely limited. Add to that spitting in the eye of our nearest neighbour, Indonesia, our nearest major neighbour, around beef exports. I mean, how can we have a mature relationship with this great northern neighbour when we treat them as we have under this government? Look, the recipe is fairly simple, isn't it? We remain competitive by driving manufacture. We remain competitive by keeping our economy as diversified as possible. We remain competitive by supporting our SMEs, by having fiscal discipline and, of course, with social cohesion. But most of all, you need to export stuff. It's that simple. You've got to educate your people. But what have we seen? Money ripped from universities. Not millions or hundreds of millions. Billions ripped from universities. So we will not be lectured by this other side of this chamber about a smart economy. These basic lessons about deploying money into productive infrastructure is exactly what they ignored over here. This is a government that did not spend, not $1, did not spend 1 cent on health infrastructure with their stimulus package. It's a government that, from Infrastructure Australia's $20 billion, we can barely see what they've built with it. Go to Queensland, we've got a promise for a light rail in the Gold Coast, and that's about it. Where has the rest of it gone? The money has evaporated. It's a government that can't even put the NBN on their balance sheet. It's an off-budget item because allegedly they're going to make money out of it sometime after 2025. This is a government that doesn't understand how important regulatory reform is, improving our tax systems, and they don't obviously understand how to keep our labour force as productive as possible, because it is the people. It's not just enough to put your hand over your heart and say how important workers are and collect their union dues. You've got to do more than that to keep this economy productive. So let's go down to the numbers. Deputy Speaker, I've promised you numbers. I will give them to you. You know, there was a day once when Australia was more competitive per hour than Italy, more competitive than the UK, more competitive than Canada. But now we've slipped into the region of Norway. That's right, just Norway and Germany are more expensive when it comes to manufacturing, the expense and the attractiveness of manufacturing as a destination. We now sit up level with Scandinavia, having passed Italy, having passed Japan, having passed the US and the UK, not just in the last 5 years, but over a process of a decade, slowly slipping away. But my point here today is it accelerated, strangely, in 2008. Well, I wonder what was happening in Australia in 2008, because I've got a little inkling here, Deputy Speaker, it could have had something to do with a change of government. Well, let's go down to the evidence. Let's actually look at just how expensive it is per hour to employ a worker doing exactly the same work. In Australia, we're blowing out approaching $50 an hour. We were $35 an hour, and we were level with the US. No longer. 30% more expensive than the US per hour to do exactly the same work. We were once level with Canada. No longer. This is the inconvenient truth. This is your Al Gore graph. You guys need to take these away, jump in a forklift and go up to where it is now to employ an Australian worker. And then let's use an index so that we actually call the US 100 and have a look at it blowing away again. It gets ugly and ugly and ugly. It is now 270% more expensive than the US to do the same amount of work if we index it back to 2000. But my point was, Australia was a cheaper place to do business than the US until 2008 and the change of government. We're a cheaper nation to do business than Canada. Right through the Hawke and Keating years, they got it right. Let's make no mistake, this is not a party political divide. It is this administration over here that has lost control of the economy, lost control of costs. And look, it's one thing to fight for a pay rise. What they don't understand is you've got to improve productivity with it. That's the great economic disengagement. That's what, over the last 5 years, we've not seen. And look, when we came into power, in 2008, says the Labor Party, at that time, we were indexing at about 104 under Kevin Rudd compared to the US. It went to 117 under Julie Gillard, and now, today, Deputy Speaker, we're approaching 150 as an index compared to the US if you take it at 100. And then lastly, you've got obviously your multi-factor growth average, and that shows Australia actually moving away from Japan. Not only more expensive than Japan to manufacture, but getting more expensive quicker. These numbers are ugly. I mean, 8.2% of people over their Wheaties can bring themselves in the business community to saying that Australia is an attractive place to do business. Only 5% saying that our tax system is working for us. And of course, as the Shadow Treasurer said, 12% regarding this as a business-friendly nation. Deputy Speaker, it should be 50%. At least half of the business community should be supporting the work of the government of the day. Look, it's languishing at 8.2%. And if you look at the margin for errors, I'm sure within that error bar is zero. That basically no one you'll find when you walk the streets of this nation anymore will say that they would say that this government is creating an environment that is supportive for business. You don't have to go and look at rhetoric from organisations of which this government doesn't respect. Let's go to the submission summary in the Asian White Paper, because even there the government couldn't sanitise the horrible fact that some of the most powerful, influential observers of our economy were ringing the bells, were flying the red flags. And I go right to the last page, and it says Australia has now fundamentally become a high-cost place to do business. And the submissions were arguing that we are now uncompetitive when benchmarked to other industrial nations such as New Zealand. That's right. We've actually fallen behind New Zealand as a competitive economy to do business. But, Deputy Speaker, yes, it's a sea of red. And yes, we have fallen to probably the most uncompetitive place this nation has been in 17 years. Our institutional framework from 9 down to 29. Our fiscal policy from 18 down to 24. And you know what? It's just getting worse. The message to those listening to this debate this afternoon is that there is no evidence this government has the capability to turn this all around. Our relationship with our near neighbours is imperilled. Our communication and our ability to get our economy under control shows no glimmer of hope from what we've seen from this government. What we have right now is spiralling out of cost when it comes to wages, and as a place to do business, the rest of the world is simply looking elsewhere. This is one of the great tragedies of the last 5 years and is something that has to change.